it's fascinating to have so many Peder Balkes represented by you at the same moment. A romantic painter, someone standing on the doorstep of modernism, someone who's narrated really through a maternal line and understanding the way that paintings operate as objects within the memory history of a family. The way that Balke was part of a larger cultural production and fascination with the sublime and with polar bears that were ripping the flesh from poor explorers and others. But so that all of these different dimensions and artists who intersected with notions of the sublime, notions of the North, notions of the romantic, who held within him, I gather, the DNA from England and from Sweden and from Denmark and from Germany, as you had mentioned, the notion of DNA. An artist whom Marit Ingeborg Lange has studied in such depth and with so many dimensions that we gained insight into a scholar acting even in the moment standing in front of an audience as a scholar, correcting, observing, and offering ways of seeing. So we have many, many Peder Balkes at play. I wanted to begin, though, by asking, before turning it over to all of you who undoubtedly have questions and comments, about two things. And the first is this question, I think, about the historical versus the modern, the romantic versus someone who may have been practicing with a kind of modernity. And so, Chris, I guess I'm sort of looking at you in terms of that, and maybe Marit, or whoever wants to jump in. I think that the notion, or Knut, the notion of how to characterize an artist's work, how to historicize an artist's work, I think is really important. Here we are in New York, with one of the world's most prestigious museums, an art-besotted public, conceptualizing Balke. Romantic, modern, historical.
In fact, I don't think the one excludes the other. He began very deeply within a romantic tradition dedicated to painting the sublime, looking to mentors and masters who would show him how to do it. But then the vicissitudes of life, really realizing that he had to give up being a professional painter at a certain point in his life, and he made of it enormously what he could by turning it into, if you will, an internal speculation, an internal forum for experiment, and found, I suspect much to his surprise, that it was taking him in highly unexpected directions. And that he would not have known later artists like Strindberg, like Hill, nor would they have known his work, and yet that experimentation seems almost by osmosis to lead, to my mind, into their work.
I'm really not opposed to Chris' notion of Balke as a forerunner of modernism, and I think, as you point out, Chris, it's quite healthy that there are different views among different art historians and other people on Balke's art. That's a sign of how interesting he actually is. Though I must admit I essentially see him as an artist stemming from Romanticism, but we can appreciate his art very much thanks to the modern and contemporary art we have lived through. So to see him through modern lenses, and that's a very interesting approach. And whether that gives him a certain place in art history, I don't know. But rather than entering this discussion of if it's modern or romantic, because I don't think that's very fruitful, let's look at how this view was created. And I must say, I would like to point finger at one famous American art historian, Rob Rosenblum, who in 1873 published Modern Painting and Modern Romantic Tradition, Friedrich to Rothko, where he sort of see Friedrich and Romanticism as forerunners of Rothko abstract expressionism. And I think, well, this became applied to Balke with Per Kirkeby's book, Peder Balke, Trick Death Game, in 1996. And it was sort of developed in the exhibition that Chris mentioned, called Ein Pionier der Moderne, that was showed both in Krems and in Copenhagen in 2008 and 2009. And Chris has also touched upon it in the Tromsø and London catalogue from 2014 and today. But I would like to add, I know the seats are getting more empty, so I'm not going to use much time on this. But I think this is partly a result of a sort of traditional progressive view of art history that, we start with classicism, then romanticism, then realism, impressionism, post-impressionism, different modernist movements. And if it doesn't fit in, it's hard to give an artist a place in art history. So, and we also see it with the symbolists. When they were rediscovered, they had to be forerunners of surrealists. And since the 70s, we have had a sort of revised art history and tried to find new themes, new artists, but still we cannot quite free ourselves from this notion that it has to fit in this line. So I think that's why we are also so occupied with whether Balke is romantic or modern. I think that doesn't matter because he's a great artist in the long run.
I guess I'm not asking if it's one or the other. I'm asking about what the characterizations, how they help us, what they tell us in different ways. And I agree that the mechanisms of publication, the mechanisms of exhibition will shape an artist's reception in one way or another. And it's actually, to you, Asher, I'd like to address this question about how notions of where an artist fits or how we receive an artist in any one moment shapes exhibition design. And this is an opportunity, I guess, for all of us to hear a little bit about your decision-making, if it's all right to put you on the spot that way.
That's a great question. And but I want to just go back to just kind of finish my thought about what other people were saying. And that is that what I find attractive about what we do is the opportunity to continuously be amazed, not just by new things, but by the things that we think we already know, and witness countless interminable exhibitions on Impressionism where we think we're absolutely finished with Degas and Monet and Courbet and so on, and yet every single time we see something new, there's greater depth, because we know that there are these magnificent figures in the history of art who are inexhaustibly wonderful. And part of what is so attractive about our field is that we're at the vanguard, where we can sort of discover things that we haven't even seen before. And this, to me, is the quandary of how to sort of introduce to the public someone like Peder Balke. And in my case, there was a kind of a natural development, because our department, the Department of European Paintings at the Metropolitan Museum, has since, at least since the 70s, had a curator of 19th century painting. 19th century painting at the Met has traditionally meant French painting. And that's due largely to the fact that we're a civic institution, and the supporters of the Met are New Yorkers who collected largely French painting. The Havemeyers and so forth left this incredible legacy of Impressionist art and art by other French artists of the 19th century. And we have this construct of 19th century art. And we have galleries filled with them. And I think we do it rather well. But in the last 10 years, just not too much more than that, 10 to 20 years, we've recognized that there are other stories to tell. And those are stories that can be told not only through French painting, but by artists from other places. And it's thrilling to see art from Germany, Scandinavia, from Spain, from Italy, wherever it is, presented by colleagues from abroad who have the depth of expertise in those areas that we don't have, to see it well presented. And New York curators and New York collectors are attuned to this, and sorry, I'm going on, but I think it's worth saying. And so just like we benefited from the depth of commitment to people like the Havemeyers, today we benefit from the depth of commitment and vision of people like Asbjørn Lundy and Charlie Hack and Jean Victor Thaw, Wheelock Whitney, who have collected in areas where we've had blind spots. So at the Met, we've had this growing collection of Northern Romantic painting, in short, for 5 to 10 years, just a little more than that, including a concentration of Norwegian pictures. And I have to tell you that I've learned about this area of painting largely through our holdings. And so when I first saw Balke here at Scandinavia House in early 2009, I was bowled over because those were the things that I knew the least. They stuck with me ever since, and I saw them here, and then I saw them again in London. And when the question came of whether we could do this at the Met, it seemed natural to be able to show them in context. So that's what we've done. But I have to say that in the course of working on the show, I've been wondering how we might sort of make connections with other artists of his time, and just to kind of force it, even where there isn't a connection to be made, a historical connection, Degas, Courbet. But you've just got to keep going and open your eyes and see what comes and how it all falls into place.
Yeah, I wondered a bit about Chris talking about painting from memory. And then he surely meant, or later on, as far as I understood, he was more speaking about the stimmungsmaleri, you know, the sort of romanticism we Norwegian call new romanticism by the turn of the century, and which is quite something different from the situation of Balke, where he, if he wanted to, he made an exact drawing and used that drawing back in his studio, painting. And well, we are talking about painting of memory, or erinringens kunst in Norwegian and Danish. That means that's also like those terrible PowerPoint paintings we saw here with a dim, sort of, you don't see clearly. That sort of a memory, which is not what the Balke generation used. That was not their memory. Their memory was precise drawings to reproduce the landscape as correctly as possible. Did I understand you rightly, Chris?
What happens when you decide you don't need to be devoted to representation to that degree? And I think that's the problematic of Balke about the late 1840s. Something starts to change, his priorities change. Why and where does it lead him?
I think he was that all the time, from the very beginning, really.
And what you're saying, Chris, about this landscape of memory, landscape of the mood, it's very corresponding to what Carl Gustav Carus, the great art theorist of that period in Germany, writes that, you know, that to connect with the world soul, you have to distance yourself from the topographical correct. So I think that was a very conscious choice from Balke's side.
I'd like to ask, because Carl Johan, we haven't heard much from you in this yet. I want to ask one little question, and Kari one more, and then open it to the audience. One of the things that's really striking about your conversations today and all of the material that you've offered us is the degree to which Balke was very, very mobile. I think mobility was a theme of all of your presentations. And when you look at the paintings, you don't notice the cosmopolitanism. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. I think you used the term English DNA, sort of back and follow Kranz's background.
Well, cosmopolitanism in which sense?
In the sense of moving, engaging with multiple communities, engaging with very
yes.
high-level patrons, embedded in different areas of study, different kinds of connections. When you look at the endless North Cape images, you don't recognize somebody as being necessarily a cosmopolitan.
No, that's true. I'm completely focused on Falkans now, and he was not very mobile. He was. I'm thinking about him staying in Sweden and being quite lucky because there was no other landscape painter really. So for him it was more the circumstances serving him in a very nice way. And I hadn't thought much about that question in relation to Balke, really.
I feel like it was brought up a lot in relation to Balke, but Kadi, I'll just turn that to you then for a moment before opening up. Very interesting to have an artist's view of an artist and a very different voice talking about that kind of mobility rather than patron to patron. It's the need, the need for patronage, the practicalities of having 8 children. So it's a different narrative, it's a narrative woven in, but I wonder if there's anything about sort of travel, mobility, to this failed relative of yours that you'd like to say a word about as well.
Well, as far as inspiration goes, I think it would be very interesting to look at all the different things that he could have seen on his travels, like churches, you know, wall paintings. I find that these North Cape paintings with the round or the circular composition and the very strong contrasts between light and darkness is very much Baroque to me. It's like the Baroque paintings, but without the angels, you know. I think that would be very interesting to look at. It's the clair-obscur and the contrapposto in the motifs in this lighthouse. There's very much a contrapposto. Even though he's a landscape painter, I also I imagine that, you know, when he's painting ship after ship going down, you know, for years he's doing this. Is that an expression of how he feels? Is he that ship? Or when he's painting the North Cape, is that sort of a dream, the North Cape, or is it like the vision of how far he can go or how far he wanted to go as, you know, success-wise in his career? Things like that. I think, you know, more psychological art or study, that would be interesting.
It's really fascinating that Balke, all through his life, he can invest all this inspiration into a motif that he's not sitting before. I'm thinking about the Swedish artist Gustav Wilhelm Palm, who went to Rome and he painted like no one had painted before, almost oil sketches in a way that is just unbelievable. But then he returned to Sweden and he never, it's really depressing to see what he did when he came to Sweden. I think he missed Italy very much, so he did not have, I think it was painful for him to paint all these Italian motifs that people commissioned from him. Just a thought.
So I'm a historian of British art, as some of you know, and it seems to me that things we're talking about, issue of, you know, something clicks it seems to me in Balke, and I think his work really does change from the early stuff, like Chris is talking about, to the later stuff, and it becomes more expansive even as it becomes smaller in a way. And for me, you know, his experience in France in the years leading up to 1848, or that period, would not have been so charged, right? The Barbizon seems to have very little effect on him. And Courbet, who's one of the 3, I think, most radical things happening in 1849, that period, wouldn't appeal either, because Balke is not interested in figures, ever. He could care less, right? There's staffage, if that. But he goes to England, right? He goes to England in the spring of 1849, and he's there for a year and a half. And the kids are in Brighton, just like they were in that castle, right? He sends them to Brighton, and they go to school, the girls. But he's in London. And what does he see? Well, this is the great moment, 1849, because this is the first exhibition of the Pre-Raphaelites. And it's the final sort of flame out of Turner, his last great show. So there has to be something there, right? Turner especially, because Balke goes back and does his own thing and works from the memory. It's all about the Sublime. I think the Rosenblum comment is absolutely on point. The Sublime does not depend on looking at things like the Pre-Raphaelites did, painting what you see. It's about the imagination. And for the rest of his career, that is what he does. And I'm struck in the exhibition at, the way that this is an artist who can paint on a small scale, but with a level of monumentality that almost no one else has ever reached in these little paintings, especially those 6 paintings on the back wall that Asher's hung there, those black and white pictures. They're amazing. And he gets it from Turner. And here we have this opportunity, right, to see Turner at the Frick, and then up the street Balke, and this idea of powerful form with a disinterest in figures, and an idea of breath, and an idea of course, color, and an idea of memory, because so much of Turner is working from memory, right? He travels abroad, he comes back to England, and he paints these things. I think Turner's a great influence on him. It's not the Pre-Raphaelites, sadly. But, I've read some of the stuff which say there's not a lot of data about what he did or saw in London. Clarkson, Stanfield, maybe, et cetera, marine painters. Of course, that's the connection, I think, between England and Norway, is the coast. Painters of the coast, you don't get that so much in the same way in France, or it's too artificial for these artists. So I'm wondering what you think about that, but I think that's the thing that clicks for him, or at least I like to think so.
I think you must have read me.
We've all read.
But well, I don't believe Turner had anything to do with it, because for me, I see it's such a great difference, because Turner dissolves the light. Balke is heavy. The heavy background, the sky is coming, the clothes are coming towards you, heavy. And when you look at, it's quite opposite in Turner. At least when I first noticed that, I see it so clearly, but I understand that people don't see it also. And I'm a damned historian. I want to have the proofs. And you cannot prove that Balke has seen any important Turner earlier. And it would be a bit late to combine him with Turner as late as 1949, I think.
I couldn't help but as he's standing there in that photograph, looking out from the beach, or just almost, I just couldn't help but not be inspired by what you were saying. What was he thinking? And some of those settings seemed so insightful or sad, really. I'm wondering more about the struggles, the earlier struggles, even though he had famous patrons, or at least wealthy patrons. How did you think the struggles throughout his life? And those girls being in the castle for 6 years. I mean.
No, but that is not true.
Oh, it's not.
No, that's nonsense.
Okay, but from your point of view, how do you feel that his struggles?
They were not there. They were together with their parents, and they were living with Baron Saad during a year and a half.
Okay.
While they stayed in Dresden, and that's only 20 kilometers from Dresden. It's not
really?
far away. It's not closed. It's not. It was not a prison.
No, but it was mentioned that he walked great distances, for example, wherever he went.
Yes, he did. He went back. Balke went back to Germany in the winter between Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve in 1850 to 51. He was there. It was a terrible storm. He came to Dahl. Dahl didn't expect him. There was Balke in his kitchen. And he said, my goodness, Dahl had to return, but he was going out to a party. It was such a bad weather that the horse and the carriage couldn't take him away. And Balke came, he gave Balke something to eat, and Balke went on from Dresden on his feet in this terrible weather to Maxen to visit Saad there. and tried to sell some paintings, then returned the next day and went back to Berlin. Why did I tell this story? Well, because I think it's telling something about using feet in terrible weather, and also character of the artist Balke, and also how very important it was for him to try to sell and earn some money to keep his family alive.
I wonder if we could take one more question from the audience at this point. Is that all right, Kadi, or do you feel it's crucial to respond?
I mean, from reading the letters, the girls must have been at the castle for quite a while. I don't know if it's 6 years or 2 years or year and a half. I don't know, but I mean, I could see that there is a chance that if he walked all this way to the castle to sell paintings, maybe he also walked there to see his girls. You know, these lives aren't very well documented of the children, except, as far as I know, these letters and these things, these objects. So, but, you know, I'm not going to argue about that.
I think it's fascinating when biography and social history, cultural history, and formal analytical history and theory come together and really paint multiple potential pictures. But I'm wondering if there are one or two other short questions. Yeah, I think you'll get the microphone.
No, but you are right. It must be about that time, the end of or the middle of 60s, where he started to really produce these small paintings. Because we also know 64, we have paintings dated 64, a little bigger ones, but in the same style as we find in the small ones later on. I know the economy was terrible at that time, not only for Balke, but general in Oslo and Christiania. We'll have to figure that out. You have to think more about what happened in 65.
I think that, you know, it's, if I want to make a large painting, I need space, I need money, I need to be able to buy these canvases and put it and have distance enough to walk back and forth. And he was living, by the end of his life, he was living in a little apartment, I think. So things, he had to make the scale down, and it's also much easier to stay clean and, you know, and put it away, you know, on top of a shelf or something, and you know, it's practical. If you
so it's analogous maybe to the end of World War I, when we used to have great romantic big pieces in Wagnerian type of music, and then we changed into neoclassical chamber music.
You must use your microphone.
Some people say I talk too loud anyway, or too much. Now, it's analogous to me then as to the end of World War I, which signaled the end of grand romanticism and Wagnerian ideas, or Bruckner and things of that nature, of the large performances, and the world geared down to small chamber, neoclassic approach to music. And that's probably the same circumstances. So you think that it might be more external circumstances than what was going on in his mind that lent him to that position.
Well, I'm very much for the external things, for explanation. And I cannot see all his small paintings with boats and terrible waves, and I cannot read them as personal. Oh my goodness, today was a terrible day, and I can't pay the rent, and so on and so forth. I cannot really. I look at them much more general, as men's situation, anyhow, and that we are so small in comparison with nature, with capital letters, and we all have to give. We mean nothing.
You know, in a way, it goes back to what Jason raised, this question of Turner. And so we think of an artist, a painter, standing before pictures by Turner, and how does he respond? You can respond to what's in the picture in terms of the subject, color, brushwork, and so on. But artist to artist, you can the range of response is much broader, and I think artists can relate to the way another artist has a relationship with material in a way that is a little difficult even for historians of art to assess without firsthand knowledge. And although I alluded to it, I just want to reemphasize the fact that these little paintings are not merely little, and it's not just that their subjects are grand, it's that when you turn them around and you can actually hold them in your hand, you can see that they're made on junk, really. They're made on, in many cases, on little blocks of wood that have been roughly beveled on the back. They look like they might have been taken from fencing or from a paneling or something that you might use to frame a house, siding, and so forth, a composition board. And they're literally hand-sized. I don't know how big Balke's hands were, but it doesn't take a big stretch of the imagination to imagine him holding them and just pouring paint on the surface, manipulating it, and so on. And that is its own prerogative. And that's a very deep and personal relationship that the artist has with his materials. And I think it's something that an artist might see in another artist's work in a way that we can't know unless we look at a painting as an object.
I think there are probably more questions from the audience, but I think that we're getting the
Turning
hook.
line upstairs. We also have a film that's going to start here in about 10 minutes. So,
Can I also just hold this up? It's at the Met, and
but I
these
want
are
to
your
thank
authors.
all of our participants and our scholars.